Presently, ancient Egypt's existence is divided into multiple periods, starting with the pre-dynastic era and ending with the late period. It's these periods that include the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom, which I mention a fair bit. And this periodization starts with an ancient practice. Manetho, an Egyptian historian who catalogued Egypt's history for the benefit of the Ptolemies, numbered the so-called dynasties, and Manetho's list of 30 dynasties are more or less canonical to this day, even though his system is known to be highly flawed. 30 dynasties is a lot of periods, and one that spans the whole 3,000-year history of ancient Egypt isn't nearly enough periods, so scholars starting in the 19th century, CE that is, began to find ways to divide Egypt's historical periods up more sensibly. With some variation, the general consensus was that there were three major periods of the nation, which took on the names Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. But until the 20th century, nobody really separated out the parts where Egypt wasn't unified under pharaohs. The period of Hyksos rule that divided Egypt prior to the 18th dynasty reunification was just regarded as the last chaotic stage of the Middle Kingdom, for example. In 1926, the concept of an intermediate period, as a time in and of itself, came to the fore thanks to German Egyptologist Georg Steindorf and Dutch Egyptologist Henry Frankfurt. They both wrote about the first intermediate period, and by the late 1970s, three intermediate periods had become as canonical as the kingdoms and dynasties. The title of this video asks what these periods are intermediate between. The simple answer is periods of unification. Egypt as two united kingdoms with one pharaoh. But there's an implication I don't like about the term intermediate period, and that's the implication that during these times there wasn't as much of an Egypt. In fact, both Manetho and I would object to this implication, but for very different reasons. Manetho never considered Egypt's history to be divisible into three kingdoms, because his whole agenda was to present Egypt as having always existed. His dynasties span the whole history from the foundation of Egypt under Menes to what was, to him, the present day, the emergence of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Even though several of his dynasties never ruled more than a small locality within Egypt, sometimes he just decided a new dynasty started when the crown only passed from brother to brother, and he might have outright invented the 7th dynasty altogether, listing any old bunch of names just to cover up for a period where there wasn't any information available.
Which
7th dynasty pharaohs
do you have?
Old, Willie Williams, blind Billy Billson, and deaf Johnny Blusington.
On the other hand, I think the idea of calling them intermediate periods is problematic because it implies that Egyptian civilization was on pause during those centuries, that the only legitimate version of ancient Egypt is one where an absolute theocracy unites the two kingdoms. During the first intermediate period, for example, the local nobility took charge of their own affairs, because the Nile's annual flood had become lackluster and a powerful central government could no longer be relied on to look after the needs of each region. Is that the collapse of a kingdom, a brief Armageddon in between golden ages? Or is it just evolution, the political landscape catering to the needs of the time? I'm not suggesting the nomarchs who had taken power back from the weak pharaohs of the late Old Kingdom were republicans. Clearly Montuhotep, the first pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom, had the support of the nobles of Upper Egypt. But it wasn't an intermediate time for the people who were alive during it. It lasted for 125 years or thereabouts. That's 4 or 5 generations who lived and died without there being an absolute ruler of both kingdoms. The third intermediate period lasted for 4 centuries. It was about as long as the Middle Kingdom. England was a republic once. Briefly, and at a terrible cost, particularly to the people of Ireland, but while I think terminology is much of a muchness, if I hear someone calling that time an interregnum, it makes an impression on me. That you consider this experiment in the sovereignty of Parliament rather than the Crown as not really counting. Call it the reign of Oliver Cromwell if you like, call it the Commonwealth if you want to confuse your Canadian friends. Call it the interregnum if you think all it amounted to was a break in England's proper status as a kingdom. But one day, England will, in all likelihood, be a republic again. Will we call the years between Charles II's reign and the reign of, let's say, Charles III, the interim publicam? Well, no, because no one's ever going to care enough about correct Latin to ever utter the phrase interim publicam. I don't think the classification of Egypt's periods is going to change, probably ever. It's baked right into how international Egyptology talks about that civilization. It's how people define their specialities within the field and write their PhDs. But at a time when so many people the world over are realising that their governments don't necessarily have their best interests at heart, maybe it's time we all started thinking more conscientiously about what makes a government legitimate, what needs to stay the same for a culture to retain its identity, and what just boils down to a society evolving to answer its needs. Thanks for watching. Remember to drop this video a quick thumbs up if you liked it, and to leave a comment with your favourite interregnum. The Council of Elected Ministers, who hopefully won't have me beheaded because it's too embarrassing to let me live, are my backers at patreon.com/armchairegypt. I may not owe them my life, but I certainly owe them a portion of my living, and I'm very grateful. Until next time, my fellow armchair Egyptologists, life, prosperity, and health to you all. Thanks for watching. Head over to my channel for more, or click here to see what the YouTube demons think you should watch next. I hope you'll consider subscribing. If you'd like to support and collaborate on the channel with me, go to patreon.com/armchairegypt. You can also join my Discord community, there's an invite link in the description.